Welcome to Brampton Focus. When you talk about building cities, talk about bike paths, walking paths, mass transit, and you focus that all to Brampton, there's two names that should come to mind. My name is Michael Charbon. Next we meet Kevin Montgomery and Lisa Stokes, two important Bramptonians who are part of that whole mix. They're going to talk to us about cycling and paths and the good things that are happening in Brampton. Plus, they're going to tell us about something that you have yet to know about, and it's called Vision Zero, right here on Brampton Focus. Welcome back to Brampton Focus. In 2014, a gentleman named Gil Penaloza came to Brampton. He went to the Rose Theatre and he gave a speech. Now this guy is a city planner. He comes from Bogota, Colombia, and he had a concept that said if you reduce the number of cars in a city, and you think about cycling, and you think about eliminating vehicular transit, you're going to have a better city, a more livable city, and a better city to raise your kids and your family. That concept grew, and it's now starting to catch on, and it's also suggesting to people, as Brampton grows and as Brampton expands, we should consider these ideas. My next guests beside me, Miss Lisa Stokes and Mr. Kevin Montgomery, are two people who are Bramptonians who embrace this. They live this life. They are members of the Brampton Cycling Committee, a homemaker, a professional designer, and people who are in the bicycling community. Welcome to Brampton Focus.
Thank you.
An interesting topic. When this gentleman came, it was revolutionary what he said. He basically said you don't need to have a car necessarily, but you can design your city in a better way. How does this, and I'll go to you first, Lisa, how does what Gil presented in 2014, now we are in 2016, 17, how does this reflect on you, and how can we make Brampton kind of re-look at the way that they're going to use their city planning?
I'd like to suggest to people that they can do with one fewer cars, for example, than they have. You can use walking, you can use public transit, you can use cycling, and you can use cars to get around. But if people start making choices and don't always take the car, particularly for those shorter journeys, and in Brampton, 46% of our work and school journeys are less than 5 kilometers, which only takes 20 minutes on a bus.
In this day and age, and I'm not...
Sorry, on a bike.
On a bike.
20 minutes on a bike.
20 minutes on a bike. Now, I'm not trying to put a balloon in your, trying to put a pin in your balloon, as they would say. But in today's day and age, when you have two working family members, a husband and wife, and you have kids, time is always the crunch. Hockey doesn't work too good going on a bike. But what you're suggesting is we can make those choices at particular times to invest the time in our city and in ourselves. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, you can choose those shorter journeys to use your bike or to walk, and you can use the car when you have to get that big pile of hockey equipment to the skating rink.
Kevin, when you talk about planning, I mean, one of the things that Gil said in his presentation is you need to create livable cities. We're going to choke ourselves. We're already choking ourselves in transit. I mean, we have wonderful bike paths in Brampton, and because the city is close-knit. What do you think the planning department should do to help grow that concept and help forge a stronger position for people to bike instead of taking the car?
Well, I think it starts with kind of re-looking at how we consider the road allowances available to us to travel to where we're going. So there seems to kind of be a presumption, you know, and a project goes through maybe a big mall or something like that. People want to go there. Problem is, it's the other end of the city. So they're expecting everyone's going to hop in a car to get to where they're going. Instead, what we need to kind of look at is, you know, where are people, where do they live? Where do they go? How can we shorten that distance? How can we sort of make these distances, even if it is a little bit longer, even a little longer than 5 kilometers rather? Okay, well, how do we make that trip really easy and comfortable for people? As I said, 5 kilometers, 6 kilometers is only 20 or 30 minutes. I wouldn't say that's considerably longer than what it might take to drive, considering, you know, how often you're likely to stop at red light stops.
But when we take weather, I mean, we live in Canada. I mean, you've got to look, there's probably, what, between March and October maybe is biking weather within some level of resilience? No?
No,
You're
can
a
bike
toughie, aren't you,
all
Lisa?
year
You're a
long.
toughie.
I have to admit, until a few years ago, I hung up my bike in October and got it out again in April. But the last few years, I've been making more of an effort to ride year round. And really, there's no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad clothing. So you go outside.
I know where you borrowed that statement from.
You go outside for a walk, you dress for the walk. You go outside to go ice skating, you dress for that. If you're going to go out for a bike ride in the winter, you dress for
Now,
that.
someone's going to say, well, you don't have the tires. That's not true. They create snow tires now for bikes, which are absolutely balloon tires. They look like beach bikes that you would use in California. Now, Kevin, you actually practice what you preach.
I do.
You do, right? And tell our folks what your life is like when you want to go somewhere.
Well, like Lisa said, it's really a question of, understanding, yes, it's cold out, so I'm going to put a coat on. I might even need a hat and a scarf, and that's fine. To your point about so-called, biking weather, I think, maybe within sort of more recreation circles, it's kind of an applicable thing. More likely to break a sweat, you got to watch out for stuff like that. One of the things that I found valuable was think about walking on my pedals. So I'm not trying to break a sweat, I'm not racing, I'm just using the bicycle as a tool to go faster than walking. And in that sense, just as if I was going skating or walking a dog, I'm not breaking a sweat.
So Kevin, you're a Brampton resident.
I am.
You work in Toronto.
I do.
What is your regimen of getting to work every day?
I bike to the train station, then I take the train to downtown, pick up a bike share to get to the office.
Pick up a bike share?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Wow. You're like the postman. Winter rain, snow, sleet, and hail. That's fabulous. I mean, I admire you two. I don't know if I could do that. I think. How do you challenge people like me who say, I love the comfort of my car, I love the comfort of my of the heat, I don't mind paying the parking and the extra time, when my conscience says you're both right? I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm saying you're right. But how do you get me to change? How do I take that step?
So I would say to you, look at those short journeys. Look at those trips that are less than 5 or even less than 2 kilometers. Like I said, 46% of school and work trips in Peel are less than 5 kilometers, but 85% of those are taken by car. Mm-hmm. So consider taking those shorter trips in the nicer weather, at least to begin. And then...
I mean, America's been railed over the coals where people drive to 7-Eleven, it's around the corner, instead of walking. But when you talk about the challenge of really making it a lifestyle, Kevin, you've been written in the Toronto Star, and they actually did an article on this crazy man who takes his bike to work. Tell us how that was. I mean, crazy man, I mean that in all good humor. But I mean, I think that's first of all, to get yourself in the paper means you really got to be doing something that's different. And you're living what you preach. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, to your point about, the comfort of a car,
the crazy man aspect of it?
Well, no, I mean, this is a common thing. It's not the first time I've heard something like that. And my question is usually along the lines of, well, are we really just talking about an expensive coat? Right? When it comes to preparing for the weather, if you're not sure about biking in winter, then, don't jump right into it. As Lisa said, try when the weather is better, or just take a walk first when the weather is cooler, just to kind of get a feel for it. How are you dressed for it? How do you feel? Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, like I said, the goal isn't to so much worry about sweating. Like, ideally, you're not really working that hard. It's just managing for whatever the weather is throwing at you.
The thing that comes to my mind first, I mean, you figure the average, the car insurance is more expensive in Brampton. We already know that. That's a whole other show, by the way. So if you consider that and the cost of a vehicle, cost of parking now, all the rest of that, by using a bike, actually there's a financial impact that, depending on what your income is rated at, that could be an absolute huge positive to the bottom line at the end of the year. What do you think you realize in a financial savings by biking to work?
Well, if we're talking about me, I'm sure Lisa has.
Of course I'm talking about you.
Yeah, well, for us personally, I think one thing people need to realize is that, yes, if you sell a car, you're going to save money on the car. You're probably going to spend it somewhere else. No, having
but
said
I mean,
that,
still, no, but I mean, it is a serious impact because when people think, I mean, you look at a car insurance, you look at gas, you look at parking, you look at the actual financial outlay of a car, maintenance, etc.
Yeah.
You're looking at $10,000-$15,000 a year.
Right.
In
So
that. You ain't spending that in tires, that's for sure.
right.
CAA says you're looking at least $10,000 a year to run a car. So for our family, that's by running only one car, not two, that saves us $10,000 a year.
Yeah.
It's allowed us, despite the fact that I'm a stay-at-home mom.
And tell them how many kids you have.
I have 4 kids.
4 kids between the ages of.
Between the ages of 12 and 19.
Yeah, when they're in the ages of 19 and up, and they all want to use the car, you're going to be taking the bike.
Well, no, but we haven't had a second car. We did have a second car until about 7 or 8 years ago. So they've grown up with only one car in the family, and they have learned how to get around the city by bus, on foot, and by bike a little. Unfortunately, my kids don't love cycling as much as I do, but they know how to get around without using a car.
I think there is something to be said about a state of mind. There's a state of mind. You have to add 20 minutes to your average travel then, depending on the distance. And you have to be able to consciously commit yourself that you're not only doing good for yourself, you're doing good for the environment, but there's huge implications to the city as well, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's actually kind of interesting is I think people generally sort of underestimate how efficient and quick bicycles can be. I think people kind of take for granted the amount of time that they spend stopped in traffic. More often than not, when I'm trip planning, I mean, I might lose a few minutes on a bicycle compared to a car, but within those 3 to 5 kilometer journeys, a minute or two tops. And when you consider the time that people waste looking for parking, or in this case, maybe waiting for your car to warm up, by the time people get to where they're going, I've probably already arrived.
And in terms of school trips, most children live within a walking distance of their schools. My children and I would walk to school because it was just as fast, really, to walk as ride our bikes and walk
you've been to the schools. The parents, there's a fleet of vans dropping one single kid off every time.
Is. And so at my children's school, it would take some of my neighbors would drive their children to school. I would see them leaving home in their cars as we left home on foot, and we would arrive at school sooner because the traffic jam would go all the way down the street that the school was on to the next major street. I worked with my school to encourage cycling to school. We increased during Bike to School Week, the modal share at the school to 17% of the kids were riding.
And it's a moment of consciousness. When we come back, we're going to rejoin Lisa Stokes and Kevin Montgomery. We're going to talk about Vision Zero and also about 8 to 80 City, where someone who is 8 years old and 80 years old. So we're going to talk about future. We're going to talk about what's coming up next. I'm Michael Lake Charbon. You're watching Brampton Focus. We're talking about a very interesting subject, Vision Zero and biking, right here on Brampton Focus. Come back right after this. Welcome back to Brampton Focus, our final segment. So what about if we create a livable, walkable, bikeable city that's in a scenario which is safe, where exercise is promoted, and you make that choice to leave the car at home. That's part of what we're talking about here today with my guests, Lisa Stokes and Mr. Kevin Montgomery. One of the things that was promoted in that concept of a livable, walkable, bikeable city was a concept of 8 to 80, where it says you can create a city where an 8-year-old can gain transportation and access who doesn't drive, and where an 80-year-old who does drive can gain access not having to drive. Comment on the concept of 8 to 80 city design.
Yeah, certainly. Really, 880 cities is more of a sort of an overarching design principle where it suggests that if you create a space, if you create a city that you feel safe allowing an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old to engage and participate in, then it's going to be safe for everybody.
So that's a great concept. I mean, I can hear people singing Kumbaya and saying, you guys are nuts. I need my car, I need to drive. How do we take a talking point and a positive objective, that it is positive? No one can deny that it isn't positive. But how do we make that into a reality? What are the things that we have to change? What are the things that we have to create? What is the support we need to get from our political forces to make that a reality, or at least move people to think that it will be a reality?
Right now, Brampton is working on an active transportation master plan, and that is going to help create a direction for the city in order to guide them to make the city better for active transportation, for 8-year-olds, for 80-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. So when we were talking during the break, Lisa, you had a really wonderful story, and it was about schools. We've all, you either drop people off, or you've driven by, or you've sat in traffic for that line of vans dropping kids off at school. And you had a very poignant story that I wanted you to share with our folks at home.
At my children's school, we were promoting cycling to school, and we had about 10 children historically would bike to school. During Bike to School Week, we got over 130 children cycling to school. Many of those children continued cycling after Bike to School Week, and the teacher who directs the traffic at the front of the school told me that her duty job went from being the worst job at the school to being the best job.
And what did that one kid say? That was a good point I'd like you to tell her.
One child, when his mom tried to get him to take a ride in the car to school, told her, "No, Mom, I have to bike to school. It's good for my brain."
That's a valid point, right? I mean, because they talk about physical activity, wake them up, make them do that, get the juices flowing, as one would say.
Absolutely. There's evidence that shows that children who are active on their way to school have better test scores.
So let's change it up now. There's a concept that's called Vision Zero. And some would say it's a little bit highfalutin and you got to be smoking the drapes to think about it. But Vision Zero is something that we all should seriously consider. And it actually started in Sweden, and they made it work. Kevin, tell us a little bit about Vision Zero and how we can take that concept into Brampton.
Yeah, well, Vision Zero really starts with the idea that because all road traffic fatalities are preventable, none of them are acceptable. And so in any instance where there is a road traffic fatality, that's an opportunity to sort of deep dive into that situation and better understand, well, how did this happen? Why did it happen? And how do we fix it? If you consider, for example, the number of systems that we use on a daily basis, your plumbing, electricity, we don't worry about whether our water is going to poison someone every month or electrocute someone every month in their home just for flipping a switch or turning on a tap. And yet, last year in 2015, on average, one person was killed in a road traffic fatality every 26 days.
But what does that's all good facts and figures. I get that. But what is the salient point of Vision Zero? What is it promoting? What is its objectives? And how would that relate to Brampton, and particularly in this planning phase?
Well, Vision Zero says that no loss of life on the road is acceptable. Not for car drivers or passengers, not for cyclists, not for pedestrians. But Vision Zero recognizes that we are human and humans make mistakes.
Right.
So what it means is that those people who design and build our roads need to make sure those roads are going to keep us safe and eliminate human error.
How would what is that going to look like? What do you do to implement that?
So you can have lower speed limits, you can have more complete streets. And by complete street, we mean that there's a space for pedestrians, a space for cyclists.
We have sidewalks already.
We do, but intersections, for example, are incredibly dangerous. Most people that are hit by cars are hit in intersections, and it's usually the fault of the driver, not of the pedestrian. It comes down to things like people turning right on red and not coming to a complete stop before they do so.
Okay.
So yeah, so just building on what Lisa was saying, yes, and we do have sidewalks, but legally, people on bicycles are not allowed to ride on the sidewalk. So now we have a situation where we're mixing vulnerable road user traffic with automobile traffic, which creates kind of a contentious situation.
If you're gonna make it harder for vehicles to move and for traffic to move, you're going to create greater gridlock.
So you're not actually going to make it harder. New York City has implemented Vision Zero. And in New York City, they did a lot of testing before and after they implemented Vision Zero.
Right.
And they found that by creating a space for cyclists separate from cars, even though that space was taken from...
Bike lanes?
Right,
Okay.
bike lanes, even though those bike lanes used to be occupied by cars were now moving faster.
Okay. I'll accept that at face value. I'm not going to deny it. I just...
If I could jump in as well, Michael.
Do it.
Yeah, so another thing to consider, it's not about slowing down traffic across the board. It's really about taking a closer look at the context of what are we trying to achieve with this space. So in the case of arterials, yes, you can have traffic, moving at speeds of 80, 90 kilometers an hour if that's what's required to move freight and goods and things like that. Mm-hmm. But we also have to realize is that there are going to be other people using the space, vulnerable road users. What do we do with them? It's not...
But you're not putting bikers on the 403. We're talking about a major four-lane, two on each side, right? I mean, logically.
Yes, but at the moment, the way things typically stand right now is the expectation is someone, a mother and children trying to get to school are expected to ride on a road where traffic is moving 80 kilometers an hour, and we wonder why people aren't feeling encouraged to ride. So that's the kind of thing that we need to start
wait a second.
addressing.
So you're going to see. I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm a driver. The driver's going to say to you, you guys take too much of the road when you're bicycling, so we're going to give you a bicycle lane. If you're in your bicycle lane, what is that going to cost us? How is that going to impede our traffic? Because, so now I've got 2 lanes of traffic, one going each way. If I put a bicycle lane, what's the average width of a bicycle lane? What, 4 feet?
1.5 meters.
Usually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm just saying because the average driver's going to say,
in a city like
you guys are ruining my karma because I'm not able to go. I love your biking, but
in a city like Brampton, we have extremely wide lanes and wide roads, and these roads actually tend to encourage drivers to go faster than the speed limit. Mm-hmm. And by putting these roads, not necessarily the arterials like Steeles where there's trucks, but maybe roads like Williams Parkway.
So what would you like to see? If you could wave your magic wand, what would you like to see? What could we immediately push forward to improve our scenario, to address Vision Zero and to be able to accommodate more people to bike and encourage them to do that for a safer standpoint? What can we do in Brampton?
So you can have separate space for cyclists and from motor vehicle traffic. You can do that by slightly narrowing the lane, which doesn't impact drivers and isn't going to slow them down, but it's going to encourage cyclists. There's interested but concerned cyclists is what we call them. So people that are interested in cycling, but they're concerned that it's too dangerous to mix with traffic. Those people are going to come out and start riding. Mm-hmm. If they have a separate space, a safe space to do that, it's going to remove cars from the road. It's going to reduce congestion. It's going to be win-win.
What kind of political will do you think is going to entertain this? Because this is going to there's going to be a financial investment, there's going to be some heavy lifting at the outside of it, and there's going to be some disgruntled people, as always. What type of political will have you encountered to date to try and implement Vision Zero here in Brampton?
I think it depends on who you're talking to. There's some members of council have expressed an interest in implementing something like this, maybe aren't quite sure how to get started. I think there's people who you know, to your point of playing devil's advocate earlier, who are concerned that bicycles are just going to slow down traffic. But in the bigger picture of things, there's already costs that we're incurring for doing nothing. In 2015, the single biggest line item increase in the Peel Police budget was dealing with collisions. We have to think about Brampton firefighters. They're often first responders to collisions. And I think that on average, it was something like 200 collisions a month that they address, 15% of their overall responses. So we're already, and of course, there's health costs as well that we're dealing with. There's a diabetes epidemic right now, and there's problems.
Well, physical fitness is something that we need to incorporate into our lives.
Absolutely, yeah.
So with just about a minute left, give our folks, if you can, just about a 20-second from each of you, and just because I think it's an interesting point, and we have to think more about that. What would you tell our folks at home and appeal to them to address your cause?
So I would ask you to consider getting on a bike or walking for those short trips in the good weather, and then you'll find that that elevates your mood and that it makes you healthier, and you want to extend it into other parts of the year and into longer trips.
Lisa Stokes, thank you. Kevin, you got 15 seconds.
Right. I would just sort of add on by saying it's not really our cause, it's your cause. What is it that you need to save some money on a car, get out on a bike, and really start exploring the city?
Lisa Stokes and Kevin Montgomery, thank you very much for being here. You're stimulated on mind. It's a thinking process. I hope you'll consider it. Take a bike instead of a car. My name's Michael A. Charbon. You're watching Brampton Focus. Thanks so much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you again soon.